Welcome to Detroit Black Journal. I'm your host, Cliff Russell. This is the 25th season of DBJ on Channel 56. When we first started broadcasting the program in 1968, Detroit was a very different place. The auto industry was booming. The city had a white mayor. Motown was cranking out its hits on the boulevard. But some would argue that the plight of African Americans has not changed all that much. We'll be talking about that throughout this 25th season. Our cover story this evening profiles Kym Worthy, the assistant Wayne County prosecutor who has skyrocketed to national stardom after successfully prosecuting Larry Nevers and Walter Butson in the Malice Green murder case. We'll talk about the trial and her life after the conviction. I'll also have a commentary about the Green trial. As interesting as the Malice Green incident and trial has been the aftermath. We will also look at the effort by the Macomb County Republicans to have Butson and Nevers pardoned. And to put it all in perspective, we have with us in the studio Larry Simmons, Executive Assistant to Mayor Coleman Young. All of this and more coming up on Detroit Black Journal. Pleased to welcome with us once again Larry Simmons, an assistant to Detroit Mayor Coleman Young and a ministerial candidate at Bethel AME Church.
Right.
Congratulations to you. Good luck on that.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that.
Good. You know, as interesting as the Malice Green trial has been, perhaps more interesting to me has been the response of some suburban brethren we have who want to have Butson and Nevers pardoned, who also are trying to raise monies for their defense. What is your read on that, Larry, and what does that say about where we are as a community and a region?
Well, you know, there are always indications, Cliff, that we are still cleaved in America, in this region, on the question of race. And all you have to do is listen to one of our local radio talk stations, and you will hear the sentiment that is now galvanized around exonerating these officers. I tell you, for me, the real story here is that 140 years after our parents were in slavery, and the American justice system said that we had no rights that a white man was bound to give credence to.
That was the law.
That was the law of the land from the Supreme Court. We had a trial in which the former slaves were adjudicating the offspring of former slave masters and did so fairly. There was not a wholesale conviction here. One person was found innocent, and all of the players in this, blacks and whites together, gave their best. Now, I tell you, I thought that they were guilty based on what I heard. But you know what? If that jury had found them innocent, that would have been the end of the story for me. Because what you had here, if we can't find fairness and justice in that situation, then there's none to be found in America. Unfortunately, when justice arrives and it doesn't go the way some people wanted to, who are accustomed to seeing us obedient and subservient, they think then that they have to overturn that. I feel sorry for them.
What does that say, if anything, about what we need to recognize and be about the business of doing in the city of Detroit?
That's the important question.
In the African American community?
That is the important question. Because the reality, Cliff, is that it's time for us to go about our business. Racism is alive and well in America. You know it, I know it, white folks know it, and it's not going anywhere. But if we sit around waiting for racism to evaporate before we get busy with our own business, we're going to be sitting forever. It's time for us to take care of our own business, and the rest of the pieces will fall in place. I'm concerned about why Malice Green would feel the need to use cocaine. I'm concerned about why Malice Green could see the need to use alcohol. I'm talking about trying to build a world in which black men are so full and self-confident based on who they are, they don't need to be out on the street to encounter Butsons and Nevers. And to me, that's what's important. Those people out in Macomb County, and to the credit of the Macomb County commissioners, they refuse to take this issue up. So everybody in the suburbs isn't caught up in this. This is not everybody out there. And I think it's an important thing to remember that there are white people in this community who recognize what this problem is and who are prepared to stand up and do the right thing. And the commissioners out there did it.
In the current mayor's race, though, I hear so much talk about building bridges across 8 Mile between the city and suburbs, about regional cooperation. Does this smack in the face of that? Does this make that something that's improbable?
Cliff, if you will go back, and I invite anybody to do this, and check the record. In the city of Detroit, which is about 23% black, 50% of the appointees on the mayor's staff are white. 50% of the police officers in Detroit are white. Find another city anywhere in Michigan that has a similar representative makeup of its municipal employment force, and I'll eat their city charter, because it doesn't exist. People are always telling us about us stretching out our hands. Every time the mayor has been inaugurated, he's offered that. Every time, many times, clergy, groups have extended this hand. Unfortunately, for some people, the only kind of relationship they want with us is one in which we're on our knees begging. And I want to tell you something. We are not going to be boys so somebody else can feel like men.
Well, now, is this an issue we should even take up? Is it a noble goal, a realistic goal, to try to promote city-suburban, black-white cooperation? Or, as you said, is racism here to stay, recognize it, and go on about other things?
Sure, we have to resist it, but if to the extent that we permit trying to change the mentality of people over whom we have no control to get in the way of us taking care of the rearing of our own children. Now, for whatever else we might want to blame white America, we can't blame them for black children. We have black children. Those are our responsibility. These kids who run up and down the street at 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning, who are 7, 8, and 9 years old, you've seen them, I've seen them. I can't blame that on anybody in Macomb County. That's our responsibility. And we as a community, as a church community, as a civic community, we have to step up to that. Yes, there are going to be times when we have to stand up and talk about racism. But more importantly, we need to spend more time talking about ourselves and things that we can do. And there are a great many things that we can do without any reference or regard to whatever they do out there in whatever that group is that's sponsoring this petition drive.
So we're talking about two battlefronts, an internal one, an external one.
Yes.
Let's go back to the internal. What can we do about those kids running the streets at 2, 3, 4 in the morning?
You know, one of the things that I hope comes out of this mayoral race is that the candidates will begin to focus on the fact that we didn't get here in 3 years or 4. This has been a long time coming, and it's going to take a long time for us to get out of this. But the most important thing is that we as a community, and particularly black men, and I don't mean to exclude black women because, in my opinion, black women have been holding this community together. It is time for black men to join black women at the front line in this war. We have got to reclaim our children. That means we have to provide places for them to go where they can be safe, where they can learn how to have fun in a healthy way. We have to be the ones who volunteer to open up these schools at night so that all these buildings that are sitting there with gyms and swimming pools can be available to kids so they don't feel the need to run up and down the street and get in trouble or to find cocaine and to find themselves in dangerous situations. Those are things that we can do, and we don't have to ask anybody about that.
There are some cancers in our communities. Drug dealers, drug users, certainly the people who are selling it, though, are perhaps a bigger problem. The criminals in our community. How do you eradicate that?
First off, I don't care if you hire 5,000 more police, which isn't going to happen because it would cost about $300 million in a city that's already $100 million in deficit. I don't think so. Mm-hmm. What we have to do as a community is come to understand that who we are and what we are is of value intrinsically. We, all of us, blacks, whites, Jews, Arabs, are expressions of God's will. We are all in God's image, which means if God wanted us to have straight hair, he would have sent us here with straight hair. So if I've got nappy hair, that's all right. You hear what I'm saying? And people need to accept that. And then once we begin to accept ourselves for what we are, then we'll stop engaging in all this self-destructive behavior, which is what cocaine and alcohol use and this criminality is. Then we can talk about transforming a society.
Larry, you can perhaps teach the young people the things you're saying now. when they're still young, you can instill them with that and they won't steer away from that path. We have a lot of old folks, though, grown folks, who unfortunately have not been the beneficiaries of that type of teaching and training and indoctrination. And they're troublemakers in our community. What do we do about it?
But you know what I believe, Chris, and this is my crazy view. But Cliff, if we begin to do things, you know, we talked earlier about the march down Woodward and the march in Washington, and I think that's wonderful. I think it's appropriate to always recognize our history. But the question becomes, what do we as a community do following the occasion of these speeches? I'm not saying that this is a perfect solution, but clearly, until we embrace the young, then what we are doing is building the next generation of old people who are out of control. Some of these people are going to have to go to jail, and they will stay there the rest of their lives. They have been broken by the system. But it's also true, every time somebody opens up a place of employment, there are 1,000 people standing in line, 10,000 people in the case of Ford's standing in line in order to work. America has got to change the way it defines a full opportunity to work so that everybody can participate in this. And that means that we have to lead that fight. And
we'll go back to that external. We did begin this conversation talking about the Malice Green case. What should our community's relationship be with those who want to see Nevers and Butson pardoned?
This is one of the great things about America, is that everybody has a right to an opinion. And I think the people who have that opinion ought to circulate petitions, because when I thought that South Africa ought to be boycotted, I circulated petitions to have it done. And I'm sure some of them resented that. I think the people who circulate those petitions have a right to express their point of view. But I can assure you, if it ever appears that there's any likelihood that somebody's going to accept that and do something, they can expect to hear from this community in no uncertain terms.
That would be outstanding, incredible, I'll put it that way.
Yes, and I think the likelihood of it is almost null and void. I think it's likely impossible.
Very quickly, in a sentence, do you think the Malice Green case represents a landmark in terms of police-community relations and dealing with that issue in Detroit?
I think it proves that 20 years of Coleman Young has succeeded in integrating Detroit and assuring that everybody can get justice.
Good. You talked about opinions. Certainly Larry Simmons has one. Make sure that you come back periodically and talk to us about things going on in the city, things that are going on with you.
Next time we got to talk about U of M, what they're going to do without Chris.
I think they're going to the Final Four, but I tell you what, we'll say that for another show.
All right.
Larry Simmons, an executive assistant to Detroit Mayor Coleman Young and a ministerial candidate at the Bethel AME Church. Really excited about that. Maybe we'll talk to you once that happens. And we thank you for watching Detroit Black Journal here on Channel 56.
Sown beside all waters in my day, I planted deep within my heart the fear that wind or foul would take the grain away. I planted safe against this stark, lean year. I scattered seed enough to plant the land in rows from Canada to Mexico. But for my reaping only, what the hand can hold at once is all that I can show. Yet what I sowed and what the orchard yields, my brother's sons are gathering stalk and root. Small wonder then my children glean in fields they have not sown and feed on bitter fruit. Born October 13th, 1902, the artistic and scholarly endeavors of Arna Bontemps have received almost no attention from scholars. Sharing their birth years, Bontemps and Langston Hughes were soulmates. Hughes wrote in 1949 the most accurate assessment of Bontemps' literary sensibility, describing him as one of America's simplest yet most eloquent writers dealing in historical materials, as his historical novels and his The Story of the Negro prove. His prose is readable, yet rich in poetic overtones and the magic of word music. I have known Arna Bontemps for more than 20 years and have collaborated with him on children's books, plays, and the editorship of a recent anthology, The Poetry of the Negro. I know him to be a very thorough and conscientious worker, methodical, giving a certain number of hours every day to his writing, and a fine literary craftsman. His factual prose is not dry, but full of warmth and poetry, and he has both tolerance and
Here with Assistant Wayne County Prosecutor Kym Worthy, who is an international celebrity now. Very pleased to have you on Detroit Black Journal. You look in amazement, but certainly the Butson Nevers trial gave you international, certainly national exposure.
I guess that's true. I found that a little surprising. International.
Well, I tell you what, I've had friends from as far away as Texas. I have friends in California who watched you on court television, and they wanted to know, who was Kym Worthy? And I think that's the question I'll put to you. Who is Kym Worthy? How did she begin practicing law?
I've been with the prosecutor's office since 1984 when I came out of Notre Dame Law School. This is the first and only job I've ever had. So I've been prosecuting cases since then, about almost 10 years now.
Are you a Detroit native?
No, my father was in the service. He was a 1953 graduate of West Point, and we traveled around the country and in Europe. I've lived all over. And after I got out of law school, he had retired, and he came here where he grew up, and I followed him here after I got out of law school.
Good, and Detroit has been glad ever since. What made you decide to get into the law, to study law?
I don't know. As my father would tell you, it's something I always wanted to do. I always knew since a very young age that I wanted to be a lawyer. I have no lawyers in my family, no friends or family friends that were lawyers. It's something that I always knew that I wanted to do.
We're going to talk more about the Butson and Nevers case in just a minute. I think a lot of people right now want to know who Kym Worthy is. You're single, you told me that.
I'm single.
What are your immediate plans after your victory? Do you call it a victory in the Butson
No,
Nevers case?
it's not really a victory. No prosecutor enjoys prosecuting police officers, but what prosecutors are supposed to do is prosecute people and hold them accountable for their acts. So it's a victory in the sense that I think justice was done, if you want to look at it that way. But I don't really think it's a cause for celebration. I'm very glad that it turned out the way that it did. I'm glad that it went well. I'm glad that the jurors agreed with us and they saw the evidence as we did.
Following the convictions then, will you remain with the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office? What might you do? What are your options?
I'm going to be with the prosecutor's office for a time to come. I haven't really decided beyond that what I'm going to do. There's several things that are opening up, as you know, but I haven't really made any firm decisions right now.
Okay, now let's talk about this notoriety, which you don't claim fully, but certainly it is there. Following the Butson Nevers trial being on court television, being broadcast across the country, what has been the response from people? Have you received mail? Have you received wedding proposals? What has it been like?
I've probably received over 400, 500 pieces of mail, all of it overwhelmingly favorable with about maybe 10 to 15 exceptions from people who I think are a little crazy. Yes, I've received wedding proposals. I've received positive responses, a lot from African American women and children and teenagers. Some people saying that it's been an inspiration watching the trial. Children saying they want to be just like me, and I guess it's just very, very interesting to me. It's kind of like I was caught in the act doing something that I did every day, and I've been doing every day for years, and so I'm just very glad that it turned out the way that it did.
Yeah, those of us who are reporters and have to follow the course certainly are aware of your work. Kym Worthy is a name that we recognize. I asked the question about your options. What might you do in the future?
In the future, I will probably run for a recorder's court judge. There's some things I might want to do before or after that. I just don't know. But that's one of my immediate plans, but I don't know when that's going to be.
Okay, so politics is in the future somewhere for you.
I don't know if it's politics,
yeah, well,
but
running for office.
Running for office, right.
Okay.
Right.
Good, well, let's talk about politics. Kym Worthy for mayor at some point,
No.
city council at some point?
No, I don't have any aspirations to do anything quite like that.
No, I'm sure people have talked to you about it, though.
Not for those two offices, but other things.
Okay, they'd like you to do it. You know, I saw in Time magazine where they have their winners and losers section in the beginning, and they name you as one of the winners.
I heard about that. I haven't seen that yet. I
Yeah,
wasn't
you know,
aware.
they have the winners and losers in the beginning of every issue. I have a weekly subscription myself, and I'm looking, it says winners, Kym Worthy, and so congratulations. The notoriety, how do you handle that? Is it difficult? Do you take it in stride? How do you feel about yourself these days?
I feel about myself the way I've always felt about myself. One thing that I've always been taught, and that's if nice things happen to you, it's very nice, and I appreciate it. And everybody likes to be looked at positively for their work that they do. But one thing you always have to remember, and I've said this many times, you must always keep your focus, and you can't begin to live your life it's like that the way they're printing or writing about you. Because if you do, I think that's when people get themselves in trouble, if they think they are what they read about themselves. And I think you must always maintain your focus and really remember who you are and where you came from and what you have to do.
Great. Okay, and fellas, my friends who asked me before this, yes, she is single, so you take it from there. I got a lot of questions about that. Let's talk about Butson and Nevers right now. Was that I won't say painful, but a difficult trial for you in the fact that these were police officers, that the case had received so much notoriety and attention in Detroit, that there was so much focus on you in this case?
It wasn't the most difficult case I'd ever done. It was the most challenging in the sense that Doug and I were constantly scrutinized and fly-specked and questioned about everything that we did. But we know that we had worked very hard and put together what we thought was a very solid case. And so I never lost my confidence that we were going to prevail. And I knew that it was tight. I knew that we had done everything that we could possibly do. And I knew that when I sat down at the end of my closing argument that there's nothing else that I could have done because I did my best. And so I felt really good about the work that both Doug and I did. So it was hard at first being microscope and fly speck, but you really forget about that. And I don't have a problem with my focus, and I was extremely focused on what I was supposed to be doing, and I really didn't think about what was going on around me.
Doug Baker, of course, is the other assistant Wayne County prosecutor who, as a team with Kym Worthy, were the prosecutors prosecuting Larry Nevers and Walter Butson. A lot of things have been said about your style. I've heard everything from very intense. Some people said a legal pit bull. How would you describe your How would you describe your style?
It's interesting. I don't think I was any more or less aggressive than any of the male attorneys that were practicing in that same case. And I think they're saying that about me. And I think mainly because I'm a woman. And I don't have any problem with that. I can't imagine prosecuting a homicide case when someone has lost a loved one. And when you have repercussions like we have for this trial and being anything but aggressive and competent. I've always been very confident about my abilities, and I know that I am competent, so I just act accordingly. And I think that you have to be aggressive, you have to be insightful, you have to be intense sometimes.
In fact, we have a little bit of you in the courtroom. Let's take a look now at Kym Worthy in action.
You were more concerned with getting your cigarettes, your lighter, and the ID card and the narcotics than you were than someone possibly killing your client, weren't you? Your partner, weren't you?
What do you want me to answer? I'm telling you what I saw.
That isn't what I asked you, because you've already clearly established you didn't see a thing. You didn't hear nothing, you didn't see nothing, you didn't do nothing.
Well, Your Honor, she's arguing with the witness at this point, and I would object to this line of questioning.
Well, there we have it. You seem to be giving it to Mr. Butson pretty strongly there on the stand. Is that your intent to, I won't say intimidate the person on the stand, but certainly cut it to the chase, put some pressure on them?
Well, it's not intimidation, it's cross-examination. And I thought his story was, and I call it a story deliberately, was highly incredible. And I wanted the jurors to be able to decipher that information for themselves. And there were questions that I think that everybody had, and I just asked them. I asked the questions that I thought they may have been wondering about as they listened to his testimony. And to me, it made absolutely no sense. And so I wanted him to tell me how it was that this could have happened the way he said it could. And I just didn't see how it could.
Michael Batchelor, the black attorney who represented Walter Butson, he was a defense attorney, received some heat from some members of the black community, the African-American community. They were questioning how could a black man represent one of these white officers who was accused of killing a black man. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, without saying what I personally may not have represented any of the police officers, but it's really hard for me to say because I've never been a defense attorney. Personally, I may not have done that, but I think it's unfortunate that he has been chastised like that. Every criminal defendant, as I often say, has a right to a competent defense. They don't have a right to me as their defense attorney, and I think that's up for any individual defense attorney to decide what he or she wants to do, and I don't think they should be chastised for whatever decision they make.
Do black attorneys in particular have a special obligation to the black community?
I think we all have a special obligation. I mean, any African American, I think we have an obligation to give back and do things to give back to our community. And I don't think it should be looked at as an obligation. I would hope that we look at it as something that we all should do. Because and no matter what your station in life is, we should always give back. And I think sometimes when we forget that that's what we should do, like I said before, I think that's when we get ourselves in trouble. And so it's my pleasure. I mean, I enjoy talking to the kids and the women that come up to me in the street. I've been in probably 10 or 12 high schools and junior high schools and churches and well, 10 or 12 high schools and junior high schools and probably 10 or 12 churches speaking since this happened. And I think I owe it to the community to do that because they've been so very nice to me.
What do you think this does for the community now? A lot of people now feel vindication, if not jubilation, that the results of the trial happened as they did. Do you see this as being a landmark case that a lot of people want to peg this?
Well, you know, I don't have the benefit of living in this city since I was born. I've only been living here since 1984, so I can understand the deep-rooted feelings that many people have. I am particularly glad that these two officers, like any defendant that I think does a wrong, were held accountable.
Okay. Back to that notoriety thing too. We're going to come full circle here. Young women want to be like you. Older women want to be like you.
Is that true?
It is true. I hear it.
Okay.
You've heard it too. You receive hundreds of letters, people saying that. It's got to be feel good, but at the same
It
time,
does.
a sense of responsibility as well.
It does, and that's why I hope that I hope I keep my focus, and I hope that I stay like I am, and I think I can. I think I have many people in my life that will keep me in check if I ever decide to stray, even for one moment where I shouldn't be going, and so I'm happy to do it.
Okay. Thank you very much for being here. We're certainly glad to have you in the city of Detroit.
I'm glad to be here.
Kym Worthy, Assistant Wayne County Prosecutor. And thank you for watching Detroit Black Journal. I'm your host, and we hope you tune us in next time for DBJ.
I decided to establish Sherry Washington Gallery in 1988 after establishing the fact that there are no really serious galleries in downtown Detroit.
Join us next week on DBJ when we visit the Sherry Washington Gallery and more.
The Malice Green murder trial has now taken on the status of a double tragedy. The initial injustice, of course, was the beating death of Green, who was black, by white Detroit police officers Walter Butson and Larry Nevers. It makes no difference whether Green was a drug user or had a previous criminal record. The fact is that he's a human being, and he did not deserve to be beaten to death, especially since there is no evidence that he attacked or provoked Butson and Nevers in any way. The two convicted men were not just two ordinary citizens who happened to get into a fracas with Green. They were sworn officers of the law, whose duties were to uphold the law. That's what makes the beating death so scary and reminiscent of the days when white police officers would roam black Detroit neighborhoods looking for victims to brutalize. The second tragedy is the response by so many white suburbanites. That people would actually petition the governor to pardon these two officers is incredible and smacks of nothing but pure racism. Anyone who saw or followed the trial knows it was conducted fairly. Thousands of dollars have been raised by groups like the Macomb Coalition of Republicans to pay for Butson and Nevers' defense. It appears that these efforts are based solely on the fact that the officers were white and Malice Green was one of those drug-using blacks in Detroit. I remember when Mayor Coleman Young was severely criticized for saying that Detroit was surrounded by hostile suburbs. Well, the people who don't live in Detroit, the majority of whom are white, who choose to ignore the trial and yet insist on vindicating Butson and Nevers prove that the mayor was right on the money and that racism is alive and well.